Welcome my channel today. Another quiet journey into the forgotten rhythms of the past. Tonight, we drift far from the bustling world outside your door and step back into the quiet cold of the northern world. Nearly 1,000 years ago, you are here with your family, huddled in a small village of maybe 30 or 40 people. You know these tasks well, the rhythm of them ingrained in your bones after years of steady repetition. Everyday lives of the people who lived and died in the shadow of the northern lights. Just as you are doing now. And remember, even in the darkest of winters, the sun will rise again. When the first tendrils of the aura touch the snow, painting the night sky in hues of green and gold, you feel a kinship with those who came before you, and a deep, abiding sense of peace. For in this moment, you are not just a nameless villager, but a part of something greater, a thread in the rich tapestry of history, connecting you to the eternal heartbeat of the Viking soul. Your hands, rough and strong, know the feel of every tool you use, each movement as familiar to you as the lines on your own palms. There are no grand quests for you, no raids or battles to win. Your life is measured in smaller things. The successful hunt, the newborn calf, the neighbor's daughter learning to weave. Evenings are spent in the warm glow of the firelight, sharing stories and songs that have echoed through your family for generations. The great deeds of your ancestors are recounted, their battles and raids, their victories and losses, and you feel a sense of pride mingled with sorrow. You will never know the thrill of those adventures, the clash of steel under a hot summer sun, the taste of hard-won mead. Your life is here, in the quiet north, where the sun struggles to pierce the heavy sky, and the nights are long and filled with the haunting cries of the wind. But in the stillness, you find a different kind of strength. A quiet resilience born of facing the harsh beauty of this world and finding a way to thrive within it. Your longhouse, with its thick, sturdy walls, shelters your kin, their faces lined and weathered like the ancient wood that makes up its frame. Outside, the wind whispers tales of frost and snow, rustling through the dry leaves that cling desperately to the skeletal branches. It is a hard winter that is coming, and the endless grey sky seems determined to hasten its own approach. But there is work to be done before the worst of the weather arrives. The crops must be gathered in and stored, the animals tended to and prepared for the lean months ahead. For now, the world outside is still vibrant with the colors of late summer, but the air itself seems to hum with the quiet energy of endings and beginnings. This is not the world of sagas and legends, not the heroic tales of kings and conquerors, but something slower, something humbler. We will walk alongside the weary and the voiceless, those whose names were never carved into stone nor sung in the longhouses, and then, gently, we'll rise through stories of wandering warriors, silent ships, and ancient halls, warmed by flickering firelight. This is the world of the Vikings, but not as you've known it. Let your body settle. Let your breath fall into rhythm, and imagine yourself waking to a cold morning in the far north of what we now call Scandinavia. The sun, a pale ghost behind the chill clouds, barely chasing away the lingering darkness. Your day begins and ends with the chores that keep your family and village sustained. In the end, it is not the sagas that tell the truest tale of the Viking age, but the simple so ends our journey tonight. Until next time, may the long days find you well and the nights grant you peace. We know him as the villain of the movie. That much is fair. He was, after all, the man who led the invasion force that ended up at the Battle of Stamford Bridge. We have a single source that gives us an account of his life. It's called the Orkneyinga Saga, written by an anonymous author around 1200 AD. His father, Olaf, was the chieftain of a small band of Vikings, likely based out of the Trondheim But to rule Norway, he'd need something more: legitimacy. And that's why in 996, he converted to Christianity. He wasn't alone. This was part of a larger trend across Scandinavia, although it would take another century before the religion took hold. For Harald, our sources abruptly cut off, and we don't know how or when he died. The sagas tell us that he fought and died at the Battle of Stamford Bridge in 1066, but archaeology tells us that he was buried in a church in the town of Sandar, where a memorial runestone still stands today. Either way, his legacy endured, inspiring sagas, shaping history, and yes, even Hollywood films. Anyway, Harold converted and married a Christian noblewoman, a king's daughter named Elis. Even in his own lifetime, he was known as Harald Hardrada. Next week, we're going to talk about his death, or at least one version of his death, at the Battle of Stamford Bridge. That's right, we're finally going to talk about the battle that ended up creating the Kingdom of England. And if you want to learn about it, then all you have to do is subscribe and join us next week. She was the widow of a previous claimant to the Norwegian throne, and she brought with her a lot of political capital. But with that, she brought baggage. See, her brother was Earl Håkon Jarl, and he was also interested in claiming the throne for himself. For a time, Harold and Håkon cooperated, raiding and pillaging together, but soon they were at war. There were battles at sea, sieges, assassinations. It was messy and violent, but eventually, by 999, Håkon was dead, and Harold was the most powerful man in Norway. He didn't have a title. The title of king didn't enter into Scandinavian politics until later. So, for now, he was just known as Jarl. But he ruled all of Norway except for the western coast, which was controlled by his cousin Olaf. Eventually, this situation would change. His mother, a mysterious woman named Gyda, is said to have come from either Ireland or the Byzantine Empire. He had proven himself as a warrior, forged alliances, won converts, eliminated rivals. He was ready to rule, or at least he thought he was. See, being a king is one thing, but being a king of Norway is quite another. In the 10th and 11th centuries, Norway was a patchwork of semi-independent chiefs. Each region had its own laws, customs and leaders, and everyone loved to fight. Within just the first year of his reign, Harold had to put down a rebellion in Vingulmark, and there was trouble brewing in northern Norway as well. King Olaf was dead, but his widow, Astrid, was still hanging on to power. Now, normally, this wouldn't be an issue. As we discussed, Harold had proven himself willing to make converts and bring them into his sphere of influence. But Astrid was being stubborn. She didn't want Christianity. She wanted revenge. She had Olaf's body dug up, threw his remains into the sea, and declared him a traitor to the old ways. In response, Harold assembled a fleet and sailed north. He cut Astrid's forces to pieces, deposed her, and restored Christianity to the area. Then he continued his campaign south to deal with the remaining pockets of resistance. It was here that he built his reputation as a merciless conqueror, and we get our first hint as to why he was given a nickname Hud. That term literally means harsh ruler, but it could also refer to a type of warship. This was a long, narrow boat with a shallow draft, perfect for moving through rivers and inland lakes, but also for moving quickly in open waters. Sources tell us that Harold's ships were like vipers. They moved fast, hit hard, and then slipped away before anyone could react. That's exactly what he did as he toured the coast of Norway. When he showed up at a settlement, he demanded submission. If he got it, great. If not, then he burned the place to the ground. In this way, he pacified all of Norway, and now he was the most powerful ruler in Scandinavia, and both parents would be dead before Harold was a teenager. Harold grew up in a brutal world. If there was any hope of advancement for him, he would have to prove himself as a warrior, Like most Scandinavian nobles, he went abroad to learn his skills. Our sources tell us that Harold went east to the Byzantine Empire, and for a time he fought alongside the Varangian Guard. This elite military unit was made up of foreign mercenaries, and it had become popular for young Scandinavians to travel there and fight under the emperors. It was dangerous work, but if you survived, you gained valuable fighting experience, and maybe even some loot. Harold didn't stay long, though, because soon he set off for the north coast of Africa. He and a few companions sailed along the Mediterranean until they landed somewhere in modern-day Tunisia. This place was called Maghrib, and it was ruled over by the Berber Zirad dynasty. At the time, it was an independent kingdom, but that wouldn't last long. In a few decades, it would be conquered by the Shiite, Muslim, or Almoravid dynasty. Anyway, Harold went inland and seized a local chieftain's treasure. Then he fled back to his ship and sailed back to Norway. Sometime between 990 and 995. This is an important detail. Soon he would try to take the throne of Norway, but to do so, he needed support, and for that, he turned to the church. It's one of a group of medieval texts called the King's Sagas, which recount the history of Scandinavia from the 8th century to the 11th century. Now, while it is true that this saga is our primary source, there are two archaeological discoveries that helped fill in some gaps. First, a rune stone erected in the town of Gamla, Uppsala, probably in the late 10th century. This stone describes how it was raised in memory of a man named Olaf, who died on an expedition with King Eric, where he fought bravely in battle. Later records identify that Eric was Eric Bloodaxe, King of Norway, and historians think that Olaf was Harald's father. The other piece of physical evidence comes from the town of Sandbyborg. Archaeologists found a ring from a man of high status who died in battle with multiple wounds. Historians have suggested that this man was killed at the Battle of which pitted King Olaf Tryggvason against King Hakon Jarl. Then it means that Harold would have been just 7 years old when his father died. Taking all of this together, we can piece together what Harold's life must have been like. But even legends can have complexity, so join me as we discuss the life of the man called Harold Hut. The first thing we should say about Harold is that we don't know much. He was born sometime in the last third of the 9th century, possibly around 933. So far, Harold has been living a life of adventure. He's been a guard of the emperor, a raider in Africa. In 1014, Olaf died, and now Harald Hardrada was the undisputed ruler of all of Norway. But he didn't stop there. As we'll see next week, he began putting his eyes on England. Unfortunately, that's the end of the story. As for the name Hardrada, we don't know why he was given that moniker, but it clearly stuck. Now, if you enjoyed learning about Harald Hardrada, then I have some good news for you. What do these two people have in common? The famous Viking warrior queen, Lega. Oh, and this woman, whose only known historical record is that she's buried here. Well, both are entombed in the Oseberg Mound, a majestic tomb from the 9th century AD near Tønsberg, Norway. During this period, Scandinavian seafarers explored, traded, and raided throughout Europe, Asia, and the Americas. Archaeologists have learned that during the 8th century, when this burial occurred, Oseberg was a major Viking trading center. One was an adult, between the ages of 40 and 60, and the other was a teenager. Unfortunately, because of the excavation techniques used at the time, archaeologists didn't find much contextual evidence linking the two women. Plus, the team assumed that this was a queen's tomb, likely for a legendary woman named Lega. As a result, they missed key details about the burial, including the fact that the younger woman might have been related to the older, or that they might have been mother and daughter. Although it's too badly eroded to translate, archaeologists hope that future conservation work will allow them to read the inscription and learn more about who brooch belonged to. They dug through 2 meters of turf, uncovered the edges of the mound, and revealed the true size of the burial chamber. Originally, they thought the chamber measured 7.6 meters long and 4.3 meters wide. Maybe it belonged to the young woman buried here. Maybe it was meant to help her on her journey. And thanks to a partnership with a museum, you can explore the past through everyday objects. She'll guide you through the traces of youth left in its clay, helping you appreciate the small but meaningful details of ancient craftsmanship. And by exploring a Roman bronze mirror, you'll discover that even objects as simple as a mirror can offer surprising insights into daily life, art and culture. Over the centuries, grave robbers and erosion have worn it down. So whoever built this tomb planned for it to be truly magnificent. The team found post holes from a structure that once surrounded the mound, possibly a wooden fence or wall intended to keep the elements from eroding the grave. But don't take my word for it. Try it for yourself. With so much incredible content, you're sure to find something that you'll love. But this, too, eventually succumbed to time. Today, the mound stands quietly overlooking the Oslo fjord, hiding its secrets beneath the grass. In fact, researchers compared the proportions of the Oseberg mound to other royal burials of the time and found that it was almost perfectly round. And if they're lucky, maybe the inscription will reveal her name. In fact, archaeologists believe that whoever commissioned this particular tomb was a wealthy merchant. What do you think the scene would have looked like when archaeologists uncover more clues about the mysterious teenage girl buried in the Oseberg tomb? I'll be here to share them with you. She was a member of the extended family of the main female resident of Oseberg. Her family likely hoped that burying her with expensive items would ensure a comfortable journey to the afterlife. But thanks to recent excavations, we may soon know more about her. Archaeologists recently unearthed a brooch near the head of the ship. Brooches were often used to fasten cloaks. This one dates back to the 8th century, meaning it would have been fashionable during the lifetime of the woman who was buried here. We know this because of the sheer volume of treasure buried with her, including over 300 pieces of silver, 220 pieces of Viking Age jewelry, plus other items like combs, tweezers, and a belt hook made out of gilded silver. So, rather than being a typical burial for a warrior, the Oseberg tomb reflects the importance of merchants in the Viking Age. In addition to the thousands of nails used to hold the planks together, archaeologists noticed animal heads peering out from the upper ends of the planks. They realized that these were carved into the wood, so that they would face forward as if running along with the ship toward the afterlife. While many ships were buried with the dead, this is the only one where the animals are incorporated into the planks themselves. After all, without traders, there could be no raids. Without the goods to be looted, but to most people, Vikings are remembered for their brutal raids. Many modern conceptions of Vikings even base them entirely around their fierce warriors, pillaging and plundering their way through Western Europe. And sure, Vikings did raid, but given that Viking culture valued craftsmanship, exploration, and trade, it doesn't make sense to think of Vikings exclusively as violent marauders. How did this unknown woman end up in a royal tomb? And what treasures can the archaeological record tell us about her and the amazing lives of the Vikings? Join me as we explore new excavations from the Oseberg site. The Oseberg mound stands 12 meters high and is 180 meters in diameter. Its creation began with digging a massive hole in the ground. Then, rather than filling it in, they placed a ship inside and filled the pit with the bodies of 2 women and over 500 objects. Then they covered it all in earth, creating a massive artificial hill. Why? Because this wasn't just any boat. It was a longship, specifically crafted to carry the deceased into the afterlife. To understand how extraordinary this discovery is, we need to talk about the Viking Age. The Viking Age is generally accepted to stretch from the 8th to the 11th centuries, and that's where the Oseberg ship burial challenges our perception of the Vikings. In 1934, archaeologists excavated the Oseberg Mound. They discovered a large burial chamber containing the remains of 2 women. As researchers re-examine artifacts from the tomb, they're gaining a clearer picture of the identity of the younger woman. But perhaps the greatest treasure in the Oseberg tomb is the ship itself. Yet despite being buried with such extravagance, the identity of the younger woman remains a mystery. Researchers don't even know her name. But this brooch is special for another reason. Runes are an ancient form of writing used by pre-Christian Germanic peoples, including the Vikings, and this brooch bears a runic inscription. While the team carefully analyzes artifacts like the brooch, they've also focused on excavating the outer layers of the tomb. But why did they build such a large mound? Well, it turns out that the mound originally stood 24 meters high, which is twice as tall as today. But even mounds, as large as the Oseberg Mound, eventually succumb to the forces of nature. What do you see? You see this hall, this great mead hall with its high, soaring roof, its pillars carved with serpents, its walls decorated with scenes of battle and magic, and I can tell by the light gleaming from the windows that it is ablaze with torches, with the warm glow of celebration. Now look closer at the table. Do you see him? Easy to miss. He is seated on a stool, lower than the chief, not as large, not as boisterous, yet somehow central, gazing out with eyes like chips of ice. If you did not catch his name, it was Loki, trickster god of mischief and magic, son of the giant, nephew of Odin. If you were quick-witted, you may have noted his horns, his ears pointed, his hair, a tangled mane, not quite beast, not quite man, but both. As he looks out at the party, one question may have formed in your mind. Why is such a figure here? Why is he celebrated? Well, settle in then, friend, because I am about to spin you a yarn. A tale of halls and heroes, of gods and giants, of courage, cunning, and sacrifice. Oh, most especially sacrifice. First, let me set the scene. For Loki's presence at this feast is itself a mystery. Let me explain. We have traveled to Asgard, the home of the Aesir, the principal tribe of Norse gods. This is their greatest hall, Valhalla, where warriors dine before passing into the afterlife. And yet, normally, Loki would not enter it without an escort. See, he is bound by blood and law to the Vanir, the rival tribe of gods, and he is currently in Asgard under a truce. Second, I must introduce our hero. His name was Kvasir, son of the chieftain Nepa, and his destiny was great, although he does not yet know it. Kvasir has come to Asgard with a diplomatic mission, to retrieve a cauldron blessed by the dwarven gods that can make any liquid mead, only the best mead. Only for kings. And yes, Odin, god of wisdom, wants this cauldron. He will pay handsomely for it, in gold and jewels, and a chance to win favor with the Vanir. He has brought along his 8-year-old son Thor, whose destiny will be even greater, although he does not yet know it. Third, and most important, we have the mystery of Loki, who is not usually associated with such No. Loki is known for tricks and threats, for murder and mayhem. But why has he come? Why is he present at this exchange? Well, that, my friend, is the point, because Loki's presence is not casual. It is a plot device, an invitation to ask why. Why are these characters in this scene? Why are we telling this story right now? Well, I'll tell you. It's because this is a frame story. Our real tale actually begins with Kvasir walking out of Valhalla and into the forest, and immediately a raven lands on a nearby tree. The raven is Odin, transformed, and Odin asks, "Kvasir, would you like some ale?" "Yes, that sounds very good." "Well, follow me." And together, god and mortal go deeper into the woods, and there, hidden in a thicket, sits Loki, and he is waiting. And now I need to interrupt this interruption, because to understand what happens next, we need to go back, way back, back to when Loki first arrived in Asgard. See, when Loki stepped into the hall, he boasted to all who would listen, "I bet I could steal Baldra's cauldron away from the Vanya." And everyone told him, "No, you couldn't. You're a god of mischief. You wouldn't get past Frigga the Watchman. He's a dwarf, immortal and omniscient." And Loki replied, "Easy as you say. I'll take him on a drinking spree. I'll sneak the cauldron out while he's sleeping off his hangover." And everyone said, "Well, that's impossible. You wouldn't fool the wisest of the Vanir." And Loki replied, "That's exactly how I'll do it." And everyone stared at him in dumbfounded silence. This is Loki, remember. This is his MO. Always one step ahead. Everyone else is playing chess. Loki is playing checkers, and this is the secret of his character. Now, let's return to our frame story. After Loki taunted the assembled gods, Odin approached him and struck a bargain. "Lokes, you cannot touch Balder, but you may harm anyone weaker, and if you bring me an innocent victim, I shall turn you from trickster to treasure." So Loki sought out the least experienced member of the Vanir, the young god Kvasir, and Loki offered him ale, and as soon as Kvasir took that first swig, he fell asleep. And then Loki, taking advantage of the child's unconscious form, cut his throat and collected his blood. And now he returns to Odin, who keeps his word and turns Loki into a magnificent stallion, the kind that you would normally ride into battle. Except Loki is still, well, Loki. And immediately, as he shakes his coat of tangled hair, he contaminates the boy's blood with his own dark magic. And now Odin cannot change him into treasure, but only into a horse. And Odin needs this horse, because as he and Thor walk back to the hall, they encounter a group of hunters. And Odin says, "Ah, I wish I could take this fine horse. But alas, my son is too small to ride him." "Nonsense," says Thor, "I am big enough." And Odin replies, "Oh, but the reins are far too short." "Nonsense," says Thor, "I am strong enough." And Odin says, "But the saddle is far too hard." "Nonsense," says Thor, "I am brave enough." Finally, Odin relents and allows his young son to ride Loki, to ride the horse that is Loki, to ride the blood-marbled trickster god. And this moment is key, because Thor is fated to become the mightiest of the Aesir, the god of thunder. But his path is not simple, and this moment of hubris, this theft of a horse that is not his, this moment of violence, of bloodshed, of injustice, it becomes a turning point, and not in his future. And as our story began, and Loki entered the hall, we knew that somewhere in this story, the two would meet again. And now, as Thor rides through the forest, pursued by the ghost of the boy he has slain, I want you to consider another question. Why did Loki have to use a child? Well, let me show you. See, when Loki slaughtered Kvasir, Odin happened to be passing by, and he was disguised as a serpent. And Loki saw him. And Loki knew that Odin would take the boy's blood, would use it to create new life, and the serpent's blood would be powerful. It would create a being of immense strength, maybe too much strength. So Loki polluted the blood. He contaminated it. He introduced an element of chaos. And when Odin made the new god, he made Thor with less power, with more weakness, with more potential for growth. Why? Because Odin desired balance. If Thor was destined for great power, he needed a counterweight, someone capable of matching him, limiting his influence, forcing him to earn every victory, every trophy, every feat of strength, and Loki became that counterweight. And now I ask you, knowing what we know today, knowing what you know today, looking at the symmetry of this narrative, can you think of a better foil for the god of thunder? Can you think of a better choice than the horse god of mischief? Well, of course you can't, because I am merely building up to the inevitable, to the doom of gods and men, to the fall of Asgard, the death of Balder, the return of the giants, the twilight of the gods, Ragnarok. But that is a story for another time. I have many more tales to spin for you, and I'll need you to be ready. So prepare yourself, subscribe and join me next week when we begin a new series on the ADs. It's going to be epic. And today we talk about food. What did Vikings eat? How did they prepare it? And how did their daily meals compare to the great feasts described in sagas and poems? Common domesticated animals included cattle, sheep, goats, and pigs. Barley was especially popular and used for both animal feed and brewing beer. Vegetables like cabbage, onions, carrots, and turnips were grown, as well as fruits such as cherries, blueberries, and cranberries. Breakfast was not a big meal. Maybe some bread and cheese or porridge. They celebrated things like weddings, the start of a new building project, a successful raid, the end of winter, really anything that called for a big gathering. The main hall was probably decorated with tapestries and fine artwork for the feast. Ale was served with meals and was a common part of everyday life. The Great Hall is a staple of Viking culture, depicted in sagas and poems as the center of social life. For example, the first rule of a Viking feast was that guests must never go hungry. It represented the heart of Viking society and culture and was a place of refuge and community. Hosts were expected to provide food and drink to any guest who asked for it. For example, the laws governing the keeping of pigs stated that pigs could only be kept by landowners and that peasants had to pay rent in the form of pork. They also liked to eat in large groups, and feasts were a big part of their culture. Food was also a way for Vikings to show wealth and maintain power. So what do you think? Would you have liked to eat like a Viking? Tell me in the comments below. This ensured that the landowner had enough food to support himself and his family, as well as any guests who might come to visit. The second rule was that weapons had to be checked at the door. Bringing weapons into the hall was seen as a sign of aggression and was forbidden. The third rule was that fighting was forbidden in the hall. It was seen as a place of peace and sanctuary, and any fighting would result in a guest being thrown out. Lastly, there was a strict hierarchy of seating in the hall. Important guests sat closest to the chief or jarl, while lower status guests sat farther away. Slaves and thralls were not allowed in the hall at all. It was where the community gathered to eat, drink, trade, make deals, tell stories, and solve disputes in archaeological finds. However, most buildings seem to have been smaller, more like big houses than vast halls. Some of these, however, were indeed quite large. For example, the Osseberg Hall was 55 meters long and 13 meters wide. There was even an established law stating that every freeman should get a certain amount of beer each week. Guests would be seated according to status. Important visitors would sit near the high table, slaves and thralls would sit farthest away. The first rule of feasting: never turn away a guest who asks for food, even if it meant serving less to others. Important figures were often given special foods and drinks to show their status. For example, at a feast, the host might serve a special dish from a golden plate to show their importance. Foods like venison and game birds were seen as delicacies and were often served at special feasts. Exotic foods brought back from raids or trading trips could also be used to show wealth and power. If a guest was insulted or offended during a feast, he could demand to be given a dish of blood pudding as compensation. This wasn't really a complaint, but a way to get a very specific dish. Blood pudding was made from pigs, blood, rice, and spices. It was considered a delicacy. Lunches were eaten when farm work was finished, likely in the late afternoon. These meals probably consisted of bread, dairy products, perhaps meat or fish. In the evening, families would eat together after dark. Winter nights were long, and meals would have been eaten by the light of an oil lamp. Fishing and hunting also played a role. Many coastal communities had fishing boats and would set out to catch herring, salmon, and other fish. Game like reindeer, elk, and wild boar could be hunted in the forest. Venison and game birds were served at special occasions. Fish was commonly served with special sauces and toppings. Bread was always present at meals, as were dairy products like butter and cheese. Fruit was served for dessert, often in the form of preserves or jams. Meat was often cured or salted for preservation, and dried fish was a common snack. Berries and fruit were picked, and sometimes dried or made into preserves. Cattle were highly valued, so much so that special laws governed their treatment. Food was cooked in iron pots over an open fire or in a hearth. Beer, brewed from barley, was an important part of Viking meals and daily life. It was safer to drink than water and served with food. Mead, fermented honey drink, was reserved for special occasions. Sheep and goats were kept for their meat, milk, and skins. Pigs were good foragers and fattened easily, though they required shelter and care. Archaeological finds of pig bones show they were common in Viking diets. What did Vikings actually eat? Our picture of what Vikings ate comes from a few sources: archaeological evidence, animal bones found at Viking sites, textual evidence like the Icelandic sagas and legal codes, and comparisons to what neighboring cultures ate. Farmers were an important part of Viking society. Most Vikings, when not sailing or raiding, farmed their own land, raising livestock and crops. Vikings grew a variety of crops, including barley, oats, wheat, and rye. The preparation of food was largely done by women. Traditional cooking methods included boiling, roasting, baking in clay ovens, and stewing. In daily life, Vikings probably ate 2 main meals a day, one at midday after the morning's work and another in the evening. What about at a Viking feast? Feasts were major events in Viking culture. The main dish at a feast was almost always roasted meat, usually pork or mutton, flavored with herbs and spices. We also know Vikings loved ale and mead. Mead was often given as a gift and was used in religious ceremonies. Now, let's talk about the concept of the Great Hall. Viking society had strict rules and customs surrounding the hall and feasting. It seems pretty clear that the Great Hall was an ideal rather than a literal place. Lastly, let's talk about food and power. Food was a way to display wealth and power in Viking society. The control of food was also a way to maintain power. So, in conclusion, Vikings ate a lot of meat, fish, bread, cheese, and fruit. And thank you for joining me today. Have a great day, and remember, explore, learn, and play. Until next time.